So it's so amazing to be with you today. I'm really grateful for your hospitality, and also really struck by the two talks this morning so far. We've really opened up a beautiful forum this morning for conversation and contemplation. So this is really exciting. I also want to be mindful of a little bit of an irony, and that is, of course, I suspect that all three of the speakers this morning ideally would say that we would teach primarily not by telling, but by asking. And here we are doing quite a bit of telling this morning. So I want to thank you for your patience in sitting through three talks this morning. We're really grateful for your attention and that you're here and obviously dedicated as educators enough to spend your morning with us. Great. So I think that you will find a lot of continuity, perhaps some interesting differences as well this morning in these three talks. But I want to step back for a moment and remember. So a lot of times as educators, as teachers, we're thinking a lot about models, and we're thinking a lot about systems. Yeah. I guess I do need it. That's better, yeah? Okay. So we talk a lot about models, we talk a lot about systems, we talk about book lists, and these questions are essential. These questions are important. But I think that in the midst of all of this, as we're thinking about education and learning and books and curriculum, we need to stop and talk about children. We need to think about where the boys and the girls, the young men, the young women who are in our care, our own children, our students, where they are today. What are they struggling with? And then, as their teachers, perhaps as their parents, how can we serve them? How can we serve them well? So, I think if we look at the studies, the data today, the evidence suggests that children are suffering. That they're struggling with, of course, all of the things that probably you and I struggled with as young ones, as adolescents and teenagers, but that perhaps today, the forum of the modern world, there is, in fact, a new kind of challenge, a new series of challenge. So, and I can primarily only speak to students in the US, but perhaps some of these numbers are indicative of challenges faced by the young globally, worldwide. I suspect that's the case. I hope not, but I suspect it may be so. According to the New York Times, 72% of teens report that they're struggling with mental health issues. 1 in 3 children aged 13 through 18 will experience anxiety disorder, according to the National Institute of Health. And children on average spend 7.5 hours a day on social media. Of course, none of these things are connected. Yeah. Major depression has seen a 145% increase in girls and a 161% increase in boys since 2010. And the suicide rate of boys ages 10 through 14 is up 91.2% for boys and 167% amongst girls of the same age range since 2010. Okay, so I don't mean to begin overly heavy. But I think it's really important that we face the truth, right? That we not put our heads in the sand, that we be brave and courageous about the problem that we face, not actually just as educators and teachers, but as members of society, challenges that our culture are facing, right? Because if we continue to ignore these sorts of trends, we do so, well, of course, at our own peril, but also risking the lives of those whom we love and those whom we serve. So this is the problem, I think, that we're facing today. And we have to think deeply, and I would say prayerfully, about how to address it. And I think that when you look at where young people are today, of course, famously, adolescents and teenagers especially are asking questions of identity. They're asking, of course, the perennial question, who am I? Who am I? And this is a sacred question. This is a question that is as old as humanity. But perhaps today, there are all sorts of false substitutes, cheap answers to this very question. I was struck by Jolie's reference to all the advertising, for instance, at the Super Bowl, right? And how, I don't think I've ever seen advertising that wasn't in the structure of a fallacy, right? But if you look at all of that advertising, it's always structured in terms of identity, actually. You will be like this beautiful woman if you use the shampoo, right? So constantly bombarding children with easy, cheap, fast food answers to their deep questions. Questions that need to be answered, that need to be addressed, but perhaps with deeper responses. So there's an ancient saying from the tradition that I think is powerful. It's short, concise, and powerful. We become what we behold. We become what we behold. Now, if you're an educator, how many of you are teachers? All right, we're all teachers, good. If you're an educator, you're in the business of becoming. You're in the business of bringing these children into the next chapters of their life, right? We're here because we're seeking transformation in those children who we serve. And so for us, especially, this saying, I think, holds some secret treasure, some secret wisdom. Because if we want to see good becoming in our children, this saying indicates to us something about how that occurs. We become what we behold. Now, I want to observe that the word here is behold, and it's not we become what we see. We become what we glance at or look at, right? No, behold has a deeper sense, right? To give regard to possess, something that is protected or saved in your memory, something that's held deeply within you. We become what we behold. We become what we carry with us that we have engaged in this life of ours. And so I think this question of beholding, deep beholding, this preserving and protecting and cherishing sort of beholding, is deeply connected to the question of memory. And of course, so much of what we're up to in the classroom is grafted to this question of memory, right? And of course, that's true in all sorts of little ways. There are all sorts of things we want our students to remember. But there's a deeper sense of memory too, this type of memory that is a soul-forming, heart-forming, mind-forming kind of memory. And it's these deep memories, and sometimes light and playful memories as well, that tell us something about our identity over the arc of time. So I'd like to ask you, and just hang on to this question for a moment. What do you remember? What do you remember from your childhood? And to get really specific, what do you remember from third grade? And if you're a third grade teacher, I suspect you're a little anxious, actually, as you think about that question. Okay, forget about third grade. What do you remember from seventh grade? Forget about senior year, right? That's a wash. Nobody remembers that. What about 11th grade? What do you remember from 11th grade? And believe it or not, there have been a lot of studies on this. And the answer is For most of us, I'm sure there are people out in the audience with a photographic memory, and they'll list it out, right? But for the vast majority of us, the answer is a very round number. You don't remember anything. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you do. Maybe there's some things you remember. Let's hang on to that, right? But how much of the scope and sequence of third grade do you remember? Now, we're teachers here, and perhaps we spend a lot of time on our lesson plans and our units and all those standards that we've been handed, right? And we think about how we can implement them and how we can bring them into the classroom, and we craft that, and we spend, I don't know, how many hours of our lives doing this in a focused way. And I'm here to tell you that the vast majority of your students 20 years from now will remember nothing. Now, isn't that a little shocking? What are we doing? What is this all for? What is it all about? What do you remember? What is enshrined in you over the long haul? What actually transforms a person's life over the arc of life? It's probably not your standards. It's probably not your scope and sequence. Now, when we're talking about beholding, I want to observe that there's clearly a challenge that we face today. And it's a crisis in attention. I don't know, how many of you have taught for 10 years or more? Not exactly 10 years, okay. Have you noticed a difference in the attention of your students from 10 years ago to today? Honestly, if you've been teaching 2 years, you've probably noticed a difference in your students 2 years ago from today, yes? Yeah, I suspect so. So there is this oppression. There is this robbery of attention with children today, and it can be extremely hard. It can be extremely difficult to compete with. I mean, it's all well and good to talk about we become what we behold, but how do you get children to behold to begin with? How does that work today when we have all of these gadgets in front of us? So it turns out, actually, I've heard people challenge this study, but I think it's still it's still helpful and largely true. This claim that today children's attention has decreased so rapidly that it's equivalent to the attention span of a goldfish. So I don't think the study can actually be accurate, because how the heck can you measure the attention span of a goldfish? I don't know how you'd even go about it, right? But it's like seconds, 8 seconds, right? And different studies say different things, but we're talking about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. The attention span of children is getting so narrow that you don't even have a way in. What can we do about that? And I think that the problem is, again, that they're surrounded by so much attention fast food. There's no opportunity for them to look deeply at something, because there are all these things that are so much more exciting, right? The equivalent of attention, sodium and fat and sugar, that grab onto them, right? And you'll notice that things on social media, on the internet, are getting brighter, and they're getting louder, and they're getting more garish, right? Why? Because they are also competing for the short attention span of all of us, and our children as well. There was this strange study that was done years ago, decades ago, and they took a bunch of children and they put them in a room, and they put a table of beautiful whole foods in front of them right at lunchtime. Maybe it was tea time, I don't know. And they said to the children to go have at it, and the children went over, and this is actually interesting. The study is actually kind of silly, but this part's interesting. The kids went up to the table with all the foods on it with their little plates, and they put what the researchers anyway thought were perfectly proportioned meals on their plates. But the next day, this is where it gets silly, the next day, those researchers put them in the same room with the same table right at lunchtime, and then put a second table in there of fast food. I was sorry to see Taco Bell and McDonald's here. I'm sorry. You know what happened as well as I do, don't you? No, none of the kids looked at any of the good foods, and they went right for all of the junk food, right? The good foods, the nutritious foods, just didn't have that immediate gratification and attraction for the children, for the students, right? So how can we open up a forum in our schools, in our classrooms, with our children to combat this attention fast food? And I think this is actually the first question that we have to ask, is how can we create a forum of freedom for our children to focus, to attend, to really contemplate, to really and truly behold? So there's this beautiful quote from the author of The Little Prince. I don't know if your students read this book. Beautiful. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. Now, by the way, if you want to set sail and you want to take an adventure, a voyage across the sea, do you need to drum up people to collect wood, have chores, assign tasks? Yeah, of course you do, right? You got to build the boat. But the question is, what comes first? What comes first? If you're really trying to capture, in our case, children, I think we have to understand, especially, let's say in the K-8, but high school as well, that education is certainly, in the beginning, a matter of the heart. So have we created within them a longing for something more? Have we opened up that space? And I think that this begins with the things that they don't see all the time. So again, I think as educators, a lot of times we think about content, and we think about the content of the lessons that the students are supposed to be learning. And that's important. It's critical. But there's so many things that are non-thematic. So many things, in other words, that they're not explicitly paying attention to, that entirely inform the way in which students are experiencing school and your class and maths and science and literature. I want you to imagine going to the movie theater, right? And I don't know, what's your favorite kind of movie? My wife loves chick flicks, and she forces me to watch chick flicks with her sometimes. And you imagine you're watching your favorite chick flick or being forced to watch somebody else's favorite chick flick. But instead of that sort of light romantic music, there's some kind of ominous horror film music playing. That film would take on an entirely different meaning, wouldn't it? Yeah. I think horror would win. It'd be horrible. Yeah. But if a soundtrack is done right in a movie, you never pay attention to it. It's merely informing your way of understanding the narrative. And we need to be looking for those things, the theme music to our classes and to our school, the non-thematic things that set the stage for the child's understanding of their own education and their journey in life. So, of course, if you're a reader of Aristotle, you know that Aristotle says that man by nature is mimetic. We learn through imitation, that children learn primarily by seeing and imitating those around them. And this isn't, the sense of mimesis for the Greeks isn't like cloning or copying or monkeying, right? The sense of mimesis for the Greeks is really to make something your own, to imitate it, but then to interpret it, to make it your own, and to come into eventually a certain vision of the world, right? A certain vision of the world. So there's an idea that what we're doing in the classroom is essentially giving students information, right? And then they walk off with that information and go off, and they're ready for their career, they're ready for the next step in their education. But I think really what we're doing at core is welcoming students into a conversation, a way of seeing the world that we ourselves have as teachers, as a faculty community. So this has to be real for us. And we're welcoming students into the shared life that we have as a faculty. There's a beautiful quote from this German philosopher, Robert Spielmann. He writes in this essay, "Education is an introduction to reality," which you can find open source online. I highly recommend it. He says, "The way we learn a language is the paradigm of education. The child learns to speak the language insofar as his mother and the other people who interact with him bring the child into their language community and talk with them. To educate means to introduce a person into one's own world, an interpretation of the world," right? And this is that level of non-thematic instruction, that a school, this forum of freedom, this place where reality is celebrated in the deepest sense and is alive for you and me as their teachers, is a language that the students are brought into, welcome into, and eventually asked to be citizens of as well. And so this takes us to the next important thing that we need to say about helping students pay attention and really be involved in their education despite all of those challenges. And that is that students have to be active participants in their own education, right? So the way that we often in industrial education think of students as some sort of receptacle, some kind of hard drive that we're going to download all of this information into, right? And then they'll sort of passively receive it and then go off with it on into the world. And we know, not just people who are interested in a traditional form of education, we know as neuroscientists that that's not how people learn. You don't learn by being passive, you learn by being active, actively engaged in a conversation or a labor. And if we want students to learn and to really become members of this kingdom, of this world, then we have to ask them to be active. And that's why we need to teach primarily by asking and not by telling, primarily through conversation, primarily through discussion. And if you do that, and maybe you do already, you'll see the difference, especially if what you're studying is innately interesting and beautiful, right? There's something in our human nature that responds to that if we're paying attention and if we're alive to it. And that leads us, of course, to curriculum, the thing we like to talk about first, right? So I'll bet when I asked you before, what do you remember? That after a minute you thought, well, there was that book. There was that book. I read Brideshead Revisited in 11th grade or 12th grade. Or I read Charlotte's Web in 3rd grade. I read Brothers Karamazov in 12th grade, or the Iliad in 9th. There are books that you remember, but what kind of books were they? They were the sort of books that were worthy of having a relationship with. They were the sorts of texts that were worthy of having a friendship with. Those are the sorts of books that we remember. Books of beauty and depth, books that pose human questions, that bring us alive to our own humanity. Books that are worthy of being friends. We remember those. And it may be also that we remember certain things in mathematics or in science, right? And what sorts of moments do we remember in mathematics or in science? I actually struggle to remember very much in mathematics at all, I think because of the way it's taught. But if you were taught real mathematics, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. If you encountered real mathematics or real science, or real gazing into the order and the beauty of the universe and the cosmos, you will have had those moments of wonder. You will have had those moments where all of a sudden you saw the deeper order beneath all things. And you will remember that. That you will behold. That will stay with you over the long haul. So I don't know about in Australia, but in the US, this conversation about wonder is very popular, actually. Do you guys, is this a common word today? Yes, perhaps? Okay. Yeah, so there's this idea, I think, that we have to give children an education of wonder. And who could argue with that, right? Of course. Of course you want children to encounter the world and their studies in wonder. But I sometimes get concerned about the way we use words. I was listening to a secular, non-liberal arts podcast, just totally generic, a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the importance of wonder in the classroom. Well, what does the word mean, though? What are we talking about exactly? Is wonder just a feel-good emotion? Feels so wonderful. What is wonder? What exactly is this experience that we're trying to provoke for our children? And St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that wonder is the first step up the ladder to the beatific vision. What is this experience of wonder? What does it have to do with heaven, with the beatific vision? And you know, if you look, I love what Dr. Perrin was doing earlier this morning in thinking about the etymology of common words, right? What do these words really mean? What's their real weight? If you look at the etymology of this word wonder, right, you go all the way back, it means the experience of seeing a miracle. To experience wonder in the classroom is to experience something miraculous. And if you're a teacher, you're probably feeling a little nervous right now. How exactly am I supposed to bring about the miraculous in my classroom, right? So I think it's really important in our classes, in the things that we teach, that there's always this sense or this hint or this clue that comes out from time to time of the deep symbolic weight of everything that we study. Okay? And by that I don't mean that the literature that we read is always some kind of moral allegory for something else that we're not talking about. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the things that we study, the good things that we study in the classroom, the sorts of books, the sorts of math moments and science moments that we were talking about a moment ago, they point to something beyond themselves. We read them for their own sake, and even in themselves, they point beyond. And the word for that really is symbol, and symbol in a deeper sense than the way we often use the word. Sometimes we use this word symbol, what it means is not real, not reality. But symbol, here's another etymological moment for you, comes from the Greek symbolene. Have you ever, I'm a history teacher, have you ever put yourself in the shoes of an ancient king or queen, right? And some of the challenges in communication that they might face. Right? Let's imagine that you are a king, King Solomon perhaps, and you're trying to hold an embassy with a king or queen that's 800 miles away. You can't jump on Zoom, right? There's no way to verify identity. You can't see that person, and an embassy might take months and months, perhaps years, to go from one place to the next. How do you know when a messenger from a foreign king in a distant kingdom arrives in your court that they're who they say they are? And a cymbeline was a coin, or sometimes a staff or a signet ring that had been broken. And then one kingdom would take one piece, and the other kingdom would take the other. And when there was an embassy from one king to another, ceremoniously, they would take those two pieces and they would put them together. And if they fit, if there was a fittingness, then they knew it was a true embassy. The things that we study, even in their limitations, speak to the other kingdom, a distant kingdom sometimes, an invisible kingdom, a higher order, a place of depth and of beauty and beyond that calls our name, speaks to what we long for most in our hearts. So I think that perhaps one of the most important things about experiencing a miracle, something wonderful, something that speaks of the high kingdom, is actually the way that that experience transforms the world around us. So there's this beautiful line from Tolkien's On Fairy Tales, in which he talks about the fantastic, the experience of the fantastic, as being this moment of recovery. And I think this is one of the great joys of students encountering in literature or in poetry or in history or in biology or chemistry or whatever it is, encountering something of that other kingdom, that deeper kingdom, that not only does it hint of that depth of meaning, but it changes the world that they live in, the things they take for granted. Tolkien says that this encountering of the fantastic is a recovery, a regaining of a clear view, as we are or were meant to see them. Thus, in experiencing the fantastic, we recover a fresh view of the unfantastic, a view too long dulled by familiarity. So by encountering the best things, the most beautiful things, the things that ring with truth, there's this possibility that all of the things that we've taken for granted, the humble things, the breakfast that our mother made for us that morning, the stone or the swallow, all of a sudden come to new life, are recognized, not just taken for granted, not just passed by in a busy, humdrum world, but now deserve attention. And these humble things also reveal something of the miraculous, if we are quiet enough in our hearts and in our minds to listen. And this, perhaps, is the greatest success of all. So I think the vast majority of you, it seemed based off of our poll earlier, are teachers. And so I want to go back to this question of what you remember from 3rd grade or 7th or 11th. When I think back to 3rd grade, I don't remember anything about the scope and sequence. Not a thing. But I remember Mrs. Carroll. I remember my 3rd grade teacher. I remember all of them. See, I remember you, the you of my childhood. Augustine tells us the first subject students learn is the teacher. Teachers offer themselves for imitation. This is the essence of what people call teaching. And that's got to put you on your knees. If that doesn't fill you with a kind of holy dread, you should get out now, I'm telling you. Because what does that mean? It means that you are the lesson. And if you want your children to become something heroic, something beautiful, to become saints, then you have to embody those things yourselves. You are the first lesson. You are the thing that will be remembered. We become what we behold. You are beheld. And so teaching is not a lackluster job. It is the most important job. It is the supreme art. It is a calling, a vocation. It's a calling to sanctity. It's a calling to be better than yourself. So it's to give that to your students. Are you perfect? Me neither. But we're called to take that higher path, to give what we can every day and to grow. So I thank you. I thank you for this witness that you are. This witness that we must be mindful of. I want to close just by acknowledging something bittersweet. When I was a young teacher, and I worked in a liberal arts school, I saw incredible transformations occur in the students in my classroom. Astounding. Things that I would tell people about, and they wouldn't believe me. And I just thought, this is amazing. We're changing lives. We're reading Dostoevsky and Dante, and they're changing, they're transforming. There's a light that's flickering in their eyes. It wasn't there before. And that's true. If you haven't seen it, trust me. And yet, as the years went by, and kids graduate and they go off through that path of life, there was a humbling aspect to that. Because here is the deal. Your children, my children, I have 7, our students will go through valleys of darkness. There's nothing that you or I can do to change that. There is no book that will keep that from happening. And even if we could stop it, we ought not to, I would say. They have to make that journey. But the question is, when they are in the pit, when they are in that valley of darkness, what will they remember? What sacred memories will they have? And what salvific role might these memories have for them? What books, yes? What moments of beauty? And what memories of goodness that they saw in you will they carry with them that might play a salvific role in their lives? And this, I think, is the ambition. This is what we must seek for our children, these holy memories that they can carry with them that may play a salvific role throughout the extremity of their journey in this life. Thank you very much.